So this week we are talking about Romans song. As many of you know, we wrote this song as a worship team because we felt like it was a song that our church needed. We don't have very many songs about confession, and I think part of that is because it's difficult to sing, to confess that we are sinners, to confess that we are unrighteous. The first verse of this song says, "Who is righteous? None among us. From your truth we've turned away." And we get that from Romans 3, as Paul talks about Jews and Gentiles alike are all under sin, that there's not one righteous, no one is righteous. All seek their own way, no one seeks after God, and that no one is good, not even one is good. And those are difficult words to sing often. And then we talk about how we're under God's wrath in the second verse, and we turn our backs to Him. We get that from Romans 1, where he talks about God's wrath is revealed from heaven against all godlessness and all unrighteousness. And if that's answered, who's unrighteous? He answers that in Romans 3, as we just talked about, that all are unrighteous. But we have all turned away. We have all in our hearts sought and worshiped the creature instead of the Creator. So we're all unrighteous. We're all under sin. And that's really bad news until we get further into the song and we talk about that Jesus has come and that God has made a way for us to know Him.
Just as Anthony said earlier, in Romans we see that everyone's turned to their own way and are pursuing their own glory and their own thoughts of righteousness. And Paul was fighting this in Romans chapter 10 when he says this. He says, "I can testify about them that they have zeal for God, but not according to knowledge, since they are ignorant of the righteousness of God and attempt to establish their own righteousness." And that's why we sing the chorus of this song, that you are holy, that you are righteous. And we remind ourselves that He is completely separate and other from us. He alone, as Anthony said, is righteous. Another reason that we declare His holiness and righteousness in the chorus is that throughout Scripture, we see that worship, whether it be through song or through life's service, is this thing where God reveals Himself to us and then we respond through song or the giving of our lives. And one of the best examples of this is found in Isaiah 6, where Isaiah has this vision of a heavenly worship service. And he sees God's holiness. And what that does to him is it reveals the sin in his life, and he falls to his knees and he confesses before the Lord. But also what it does is it moves him to worship, not only on his knees, but through the giving of his life for the service of the Lord.
So that brings us to respond in a way that we look at our Creator, that we see God in all of His majesty and all of His wonder. And instead of pursuing the creation, like we talked about in verse 1 and 2, we pursue the Creator. We pursue God for who He is. And we lay down the sin behind us. We don't pursue sin anymore. We pursue God and His righteousness. As Paul talks about in Romans 12, do not be conformed to the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. That's what we pursue. We pursue His righteousness. We pursue to know Him and be transformed by His word and be transformed by His truth.
So throughout this entire song, we have seen our position before a holy God. We've seen our sin and the wrath that we're completely deserving of. We've declared His holiness and His righteousness alone. We've declared our goal in pursuing Jesus and to become more like Him by the transforming and renewing of our minds. And then finally we come to the bridge, and we're reminded of what God has done for us through the person and work of Jesus. And we find that in Romans chapter 8. Romans 8 says, "We know that all things work together for the good of those who love God, who are called according to His purpose. For those He foreknew, He also predestined to be conformed to the image of His Son, so that He would be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. And those He predestined, He called. And those He called, He also justified. And those He justified, He also glorified." And this is important for us to remember and to sing. Just as Romans 5 says that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. So even while we're confessing our sin and God's holiness, we remember that even through that, while we had our backs turned to God, He pursued us through the person and work of Jesus. So as we sing this song, remember the holiness of God. Remember His righteousness and that none are righteous before Him. remember your sin and your standing before our holy God. But also remember the salvation provided for you through Jesus Christ. As we sing, pray Psalm 51 over your life. Restore the joy of your salvation. Restore that to us. And even as we sing in the last line of the bridge, in you we're satisfied. Pastor John Piper says that God is most glorified in us when we are most satisfied in Him. And we become satisfied in Him when we remember our standing before Him and what He's done for us on the cross.
So remember, as we make these behind the song videos, our purpose is so that as we sing together on Sundays, that you think about the words that we're singing. So my challenge to you this Sunday is that you don't check out as we sing this song, but that you would think about the lyrics that we're singing and give praise and honor to our God and Father.